It's week 3 of the Beyond Unreal podcast. I am the White Dragon.
And here's Sir Briz.
All right, so a big thing happened this week was we got some pretty significant commits on the Git repository. Why don't you go through those?
All right, so most of what happened this week was improvements to the DM game mode that they're working on right now. They also posted a podcast video, the DM gameplay demo.
that was great to watch.
Which was funny to watch, but showed definitively how much work they had to do. And then Steve put his own movement prototype in that is the default for the UT DM game mode. And Nick has added another prototype. So now there's 4 Nick prototypes in the GitHub repository. For the DM functionality, they added weapon pickups, they added a basic HUD, so you can go into a game and you can actually play. You can have people join in, you can kill, you can get killed. There's quite a few other things, like they added environmental effects. The goo on deck, for example, will kill you. They've toned down the post-processing, so there's not a lot of flashing in levels and stuff like that. They also have added a whole bunch of assets for different things. Like they added a sky texture. They added some weapon skins and stuff like that. So they're making huge progress on getting us to a deathmatch alpha that they promised. And it's been pretty exciting to watch.
They're really moving quickly. It's kind of hard to keep up. Now with Nick's prototype, the big thing I noticed that he had added in there was the sliding.
Yep.
Which, and just based on my reading of the forum, it wasn't really received all that well.
Yeah, it seemed like there were several people that liked it, but that pretty much everyone agreed that the way that it was implemented was far too forgiving.
Well, my thing is still just that I don't like things that carry momentum.
Yep.
I don't like Quake. I don't want UT to become Quake. And anything that carries momentum kind of brings it towards that thing, especially if you can carry momentum perpetually, which this doesn't do. But
yeah, I posted something on the forums that said something to that effect, and Galangwar said, I don't understand why you don't really like this, and my response to him was, and I still completely believe this, that every game that has ever made momentum a core game mechanic has had the community turn that game mechanic into the primary movement mechanic.
Yes.
So if you look at Quake 3 Arena,
CPMA.
for example, CPMA especially, Warsaw, Nextwiz, Shootmania, all these games that had mechanics that allowed you to preserve and carry and increase momentum, that became the primary movement mechanic. Everybody had to learn how to carry momentum, or there was no way you could be successful at the game. You look at CPMA, like, people are so good at strafe jumping with the air control that CPMA gives you that they can zip past everybody. And anybody that doesn't know that mechanic, they'll pick off mid-flight and keep moving. These guys never stop carrying their momentum. It's ridiculous. And I think it's awesome that they can do that, but that's not a game I want to play. And I don't want UT to turn into that game.
Well, there's lots of games that have done that and have done it really, really well. I like UT because UT is more about really short, quick, but very unpredictable movements.
Yep.
Trying to hit somebody's head off when they're bouncing all around and just little tiny movements is something I find challenging.
Yep. Well, and to me too, like, a problem that I have with adding a lot of movement mechanics is that, to me, the depth in UT comes from outside of the movement mechanics. There's so much other depth to the game, like the weapon balance and the quality of levels, like the map knowledge and control and all those kind of things.
That get the game types.
Yeah, and those are things that I enjoyed more. Like, I remember very well UT coming out with Quake 3 Arena in tow. It was a big competition. There was a PC Gamer issue where the demo disc...
That was how I got into UT, was because the demo disc that was in the PC Gamer.
The entire issue was about UT versus Quake 3 Arena. The demo disc that came with the magazine had only 2 demos on it, Quake 3 Arena and the UT demo. And one thing that I remember from playing both of those was that Quake 3 Arena just had Deathmatch. Yeah. And UT had CTF, Deathmatch, TDM, Last Man Standing, Domination, Assault, like all in the demo, for one thing. And the other thing was the UT demo was moddable, and it came with the editor. You could open up the editor, create a level, and release it for the UT demo. Not even the full game. And I was like, this is ridiculous and awesome. I loved it. I loved jumping into the DM matches. I loved jumping into the CTF matches. And that was something that Quake couldn't even compare to at the time. It was awesome.
Yeah. Well, and I specifically remember that PC Gamer issue where they compared the two, which one is better. And even in their reviews of the individual games, they liked Unreal Tournament more because they thought that the depth of the different game types and the crazy weapons was better than the really solid deathmatch mechanics of Quake.
Yep.
So another thing is we still have this speed up mechanic. One of the things that I'm seeing is that a lot of people focus on the fact that you can't really tell that it's happening.
Yep.
And that it needs to be rebalanced. And my opinion is rebalance all you want. I'm still going to hate it. Because to me, moving should be interesting. Getting from point A to point B when nobody else is around, that's a pretty good portion of the game. You spend a lot of time doing that. And that in itself should be fun. And having things like the dodge makes that entertaining. I just don't think that navigating around the level that we should encourage people to do it by walking in straight lines. It just doesn't make sense.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. The defense of the people that enjoyed the dodge jump, I mean, one of the things they liked about it was when there's nobody around and you had to get from point A to point B, it was interesting to dodge jump.
Yeah.
It was interesting to wall dodge jump. Getting up to somewhere where a pickup was. If you had to wall dodge jump to get up there, that was fun. It was an interesting mechanic. You know, my other problem with the speed up too is just that I feel like in order to balance it, it will have to de-emphasize.
It's going to have to be faster than dodge.
Yeah. If you watch our video, which shows the mechanics from last week, you can see that even in the video, it's pretty hard to tell when the speed up is happening. And it takes long enough that your perception is, I'm moving the same speed that I was before. When you really notice it is when you cut it short. When you dodge out of it, you can tell, oh, I was going fast and now I'm going slow. But getting the speed up doesn't really feel interesting at all. Telling people, oh, you're going to get a speed up, just encourages, like you said, people running in straight lines. And as we all know, running in straight lines in UT is a good way to get yourself killed. Run across a doorway in a straight line where somebody just happens to be trailing their sniper zoom scope at you, you're going to get your head popped off. And if you were dodging, maybe you're still predictable, but there's a little bit, that just barely enough unpredictability that you could survive walking past that doorway.
Yeah. Like you mentioned, we do have a video up that goes into more detail about all of the mechanics that are currently in that build. I'll have a link in the video. I also want to talk about two other prototypes that have been put out by the community that we find interesting. So the first one is the MonsOlympus has a prototype. And if you don't know this guy, he was probably the most prolific Epic official forum poster back in the 2K3 UT3 days. I just remember going there and like every other post was him. And he's quite good with Unreal Script and he knows the coding pretty well. I think the most interesting thing that he's done is that he just really thought out how he did it. The wall dodge, the dodge when you're on a ramp, the values for those are all a little bit different, which I think is good. Now, the other thing that he tried to do was we keep talking about how do you solve the problem of dodge jump. You can just go really far and you can get out of a fight. Well, his solution is that when you do the dodge jump, it pretty much kills your horizontal momentum. It redirects it up.
Yep. Yeah, his dodge jump solution was give you some more height, so it gives you the utility that a dodge jump normally would, but it takes away all of the value for the distance, getting more distance out of a dodge jump. It actually, I would have to test this to know for sure, but I think it actually is better for you traversal-wise to just dodge than it is to do the dodge jump.
Now, the issue I have with Mon's prototype as I've seen it, and I really haven't had a chance to really toy around with it, but watching the videos, there's just something about it that doesn't quite feel right. But this kind of highlights an issue that I think is with any new movement mechanic. There's a limit, we've learned, there's a limit to how much the UT community is going to accept.
Yep.
We could add in strafe jumping. But it would be a
Yep.
completely different game, and nobody in the community would like it.
Yep.
And we're talking about sliding and maybe wall running. We're going to get into wall running here in a second. How different can it really be before it's too unfamiliar?
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's going to be a challenge with adding anything. I mean, even the mantling, the way it's implemented now, I'm still a little wishy-washy on. But even the mantling, it changes the gameplay in some key ways that I think are going to be interesting to watch when people actually have a chance to play with it in real life, quote unquote. The main thing is that right now you bounce off of a ledge and off of a corner and up onto a ledge. And that gives you a lot of utility, but it also veers off from UT.
On the point of the mantling, so let's go into, there's another prototype by Sneh, and he has a couple of pretty crazy movements in there, but the thing that I really like in his is just the wall running. So I actually think that mantling might be implemented a little bit better at wall running, because with wall running you can basically run against a wall for a second and it will go up just a little bit, but you have to like actively do something to make it happen.
Yeah.
And so it could still accomplish the same thing as mantling, allow you to get up a wall that you didn't quite make it to, and it would punish you like you said you've wanted.
Yeah, the thing that I like about wall running is that implemented properly, it just adds to the movement mechanics. It doesn't really take away from other mechanics. The speed up, for example, if it's done in a bad way, will kind of negate the use of dodging. And that seems like a big negative to me. So if speed up is kept, that needs to be kept in mind. We can't eliminate the purpose of dodging to keep the speed up mechanic. With wall running, I see the same kinds of potential problems that you could run into, but there's not another mechanic that's like wall running. And wall running doesn't give you something that another movement mechanic gives you. It just adds a little spice to the movement, and it also gives you a way to carry your momentum slightly, but it drops off rather rapidly, and it's mostly as you're falling to the ground. It doesn't give you a ton of vertical height, and it doesn't really increase your horizontal momentum that much. It's kind of like dodging straight forward.
Yeah. The thing with the wall running is it has the potential to really break things. If you watch his video, you can change the values quite a bit. And if you set the values just right, you can walk along that whole wall. But when you tone it down and it's just a little bit, there's still that thought that, well, map designers are really going to have to take this into consideration because it could be used in a lot of places.
Yeah. And that's maybe not a problem, but an issue with many of the mechanics that have been proposed. Like sliding, for example, is something that map designers will definitely have to take into account when they're designing their maps. How far can you slide? And if it's a short distance, will people ever slide? If it's a long distance, then map designers have to start accounting for an additional amount of distance you can travel off of a dodge. Now you can dodge into a slide and slide a short distance. Adding any horizontal distance to your movement will force mappers to account for that horizontal distance.
They're going to have to make that hallway bigger so that it's not as easy to get away.
Yep.
Now, I'll want to go through some of the comments that we got on our video last week. So Tellweaver, who's another guy that we remember from the old Epic forum, said, I have to disagree the comment about the Z-axis. It wasn't because 2004 had relatively complex movements going on that brought in more interesting stuff in vertical play. I wouldn't even put it on the larger map scale. No, it was a simple matter of level design. There were fairly many jump pads and lifts of which you couldn't do a lift jump to another platform were rare. UT3's stock maps didn't actively encourage you to do that much, but there are quite some community ones that do. And I actually agree with you to an extent on that point. Most of the default maps that came with UT3 have hardly any Z-axis movement.
Yeah.
There's jump pads, but there aren't jump pads that jumping off of the jump pad allows you to get to somewhere strange.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily see a lot of shooting along the Z-axis. So it's not just about moving up and down on the Z-axis. It's also about going up a jump pad and doing a moving shot combo while you're on the pad. Now that's actually something UT3 does really well, and I've seen some really cool videos in campgrounds of people doing moving shot combos.
Yep.
But on the other hand, you don't really see a whole lot of air rocks in UT3, which was something that was really fun, especially in 2K3.
Yeah, part of the reason why you don't see that so much in UT3 is because people feel like it's easier to just trail someone on the ground. Z-axis play in UT3 isn't as emphasized as it is in 2K4 for sure. It is kind of funny that the map with the most Z-axis play in UT3 is a huge CTF map. Vertebrae is massive.
Yeah,
I think it's
huge.
probably one of the biggest maps in the core game types in UT3.
Very confusing too.
But as over the line huge and Z-axis as that map is, it was actually a really interesting idea. It would have been really cool to see some other maps that Epic could make that would have that same kind of verticality with deathmatch levels, for example. Sentinel, there's no Z-axis play. There's like one place where you get some Z-axis, and it's like a ledge that everyone shot combos. If all the places where you can get some Z-axis play are places where people are just like, I'm just going to do the same maneuver against that Z-axis play every single time, then it doesn't really add any value to the map.
Right.
I will say, too, though, that there are cases in 2K4 where the Z-axis kind of ruins the play. Projectile weapons, for example, aren't very good in 2K4. Where's the only place you can use them? Look at campgrounds, for example. The room with all the platforms and the lift that goes up to the ledge. Everybody used projectiles in there. And why did they use projectiles? Because you could drop on somebody's head with 3 rockets in their face, and you'll walk away unscathed.
So moving on, we had another comment from Mess. He said, Major League UT actually had 25 seasons of CTF. You're right, and I'm wrong. The original, so he had a quote, and I'm going to read his full quote here. The main responsibility of UT3's limited success was ours, the communities, the UT99 hardcore players that already didn't move on to 2KX because they didn't accept the expanded movement, and the UT2KX hardcore players that welcomed the full jumpiness and didn't accept the compromise of UT3 with free but reduced powerful movement. But a new UT to reunite all UT generation fans must be somewhere around here, the golden mean between UT99 and 2KX. Not only to satisfy all UT fans equally, but also the balance between competitive and casual players. So I have to disagree on the first point, namely because our personal experience at Beyond Unreal showed that there was really nothing that the community could do. At some point, we'll probably get JD in here and he can talk about the work that he did in UT3, because he was the guy that was in charge of our weekly Frag BU event, and he worked really, really hard to keep that thing going. And there was a lot of players that worked really, really hard to keep that going, and they just couldn't. It just didn't work out.
Yeah, and I would say he wasn't unsuccessful. I mean, Frag BU ran in UT3 for probably about a year, where it was populated for a few hours a night. Now, why is that disappointing? Because in 2K3 and 2K4, we had a server, Frag BU server, populated every single night of the event, which was Friday and Saturday, for hours upon hours.
Oh, I would play 12 hours every weekend.
I mean, in 2K3, Webslinger ran the server. It was the web. It was a condemned server that he ran for the condemned clan. 5 p.m. to midnight on Friday and Saturday, it was full the entire time. And I remember getting on the server minutes before 5 o'clock, and he had a reservation system, so at 5 o'clock, everybody'd get booted off, and you'd have to rejoin in. And it was like anxiety a little bit, because the server was full right before 5 p.m. And everybody would get kicked off, and it was like, who's going to make it back in? And there were a lot of times where I tried to join the Frag BU server, and I couldn't. And I had to go play on some other server. And in 2K4, Recon Gamer probably benefited a lot from the fact that Frag BU was always so full, because the overflow players from Frag BU would go play on Recon Gamer until Frag BU opened up. So anyway, it was disappointing in UT3 that we could only keep the server full for a few hours and then it would be dead. But I think that just speaks a lot to UT3. Like, One thing that I really think about the game is that there wasn't a lot of variety to it. There was basically like 3 types of levels in the game. It kind of made the game a little boring and dreary. Colors in the game were just so muted. There wasn't a lot of color in the levels. It was mostly just browns and grays.
Well, they had a lot of levels that are actually quite pretty. So, like the gateway level, it has that kind of lush waterfall area, but at the same time, it just doesn't feel like as alive as the original Unreal levels did, for instance.
Yeah. Well, and the original Unreal levels had tons of color to them. I mean, the variety was off the charts. And one of the reasons for UT's success was that there was a level for every scenario. I'm going to plug for a second here something maybe I shouldn't, but on GameSpot they have a show, and I can't even think of what it's called now. The Point, that's what it's called. This past week they did a show on The Point called Unreal Tournament is Just the Best. And watching that, his intention was to talk about all the UT games. And what did he do? He talked the entire time about the original UT. Why? Because it was insane for its time. It had so many game types, had so much variety in the levels. It had, in one moment you're playing in a space station, and the next moment you're on an asteroid with 2 opposing towers. And the next level you're on conveyor belts. There was just so much variety in the game, and that's something that UT3 just did not have. I went back through reading forum posts on Beyond Unreal before Unreal Tournament 3 came out. It was really interesting. One of the threads that I read was actually a thread that somebody started, I think it was Celerock started, telling a rumor that UT3 would all happen on a single planet. And it was funny to read how everybody's like, no way, there's no way that could happen. There's not enough variety on a single planet. And he was proven right. I can't even believe it. Everybody was saying, that has to be wrong. There's no way that could be right. And I just try to think back to like the mental gymnastics I had to have gone through to justify, oh, this is going to work out all right, when it actually turned out to be true. But if you look at the game now, you can see that's a big flaw with the game. There's so little variety in UT3, and that's a huge problem.
Yeah. The original's second point, though, the thing that happened with UT3 was, especially with the gameplay, was Epic had an idea for the gameplay, and they developed it. We were really frustrated at the time because we really didn't get a whole lot of information about the game. I mean, I guess we knew from the gameplay videos generally what the feeling was, and it was going to be close. But we were kind of sitting there going, oh, well, there's got to be more words and more information, and it never came. And then the game came out, and it was like, well, you know, where's this and where's that? That's not going to happen with this game, because we're seeing it at every point along the way. We're involved in building the game, and if something doesn't work, Epic at any time can pull a complete 180.
Yep.
I mean, who's to say that we develop this for 6 months and then we decide that the movement needs to be completely reworked and we just completely start from scratch again on the movement? That could happen.
Yep. I don't think that when Epic decides some things on the movement that they're actually going to be decided for a long time. I think it's just saying this is what we think about the movement right now. But along with that, though, one of the problems that can happen is that I think you run into a situation like UT3 where they said, we want to keep the double jump in. I feel like that had to have been something that they thought about a lot during the entire process. And because the double jump stayed in, there were so many places where there's little ledges you can't even get on without the double jump. And it's just frustrating because the game feels so much more down to the ground.
Yeah.
And you feel like, oh, I should just be able to single jump over that. Nope, you can't. And flak on deck. Okay, come on. Everyone complained in 2K4 that took a double jump to get to the flak. And what happened in UT3? They made the exact same mistake. Everybody complained about it in 2K4. They did exactly the same thing in UT3. So it is a challenge, and they can change all the way along. But I think it's important to remember that we want to have good fundamentals. The fundamental movement mechanics need to feel really good.
Yeah, well, and I think part of it, too, is that we as a community do need to stay open-minded about things.
Yep.
There's certainly a limit to what people will accept in terms of, like, a new element. But, like, I think wall running is a really good example. I think it could really work. So let's not close our minds to it. Let's try them out. Because what will happen is you get yourself married to one specific thing, and so much so to the point that you don't even really remember why you liked it or why it's in there. It just becomes a battle to keep that one thing,
Yeah.
and that prevents you from seeing all these other possibilities.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of mechanics that can replace something that you liked and give you the same kind of feeling as that mechanic gave you, but not come with the negative ramifications. And the other point, too, is that in the community, I started a thread that was like feedback on last week's movement. The reason why I did that is I felt like we needed a thread to talk about what's actually happening in the movement, because almost every other thread in the movement discussion forum has turned into a battle between whether dodge jump should exist or not. It's pointless. There's no reason to talk about all these, mechanics that probably won't come back. What matters is to talk about the mechanics that they have in the Nick's prototypes and in Steve's prototype. Tell Epic what's good, what's bad, what needs to be adjusted. If we can't do that in a level-headed way, then we're never going to get them to change anything. This will turn into Epic's UT game. I'm personally fine with that, probably, but the downside to that is that it will feel like the community had no contribution. And I really think that the community has a lot to offer, but we're not going to be able to offer it if we have to deal with 600 post threads arguing about a single mechanic.
Yeah, well, I think it's really important to realize the limitations of the community. You were saying earlier that during the UT3 development that certain information would come out and we were like, oh no, it's not going to be like that. And we were wrong about certain things, and we kind of lied to ourselves in some respects. And you kind of have to ask yourself, is the way that I'm approaching this making me more prone to that type of error?
Yep. Yeah, I think so. Just as a final note on that, I mean, there were a lot of things in UT3, and even when I went out to Epic headquarters and played the game a few weeks before it came out, I could have told you half the problems that were going to happen. But the reason I didn't is because I was lied to myself saying that this is going to work out. An important thing to ask yourself every time you're thinking a mechanic has to be included or else is, am I lying to myself thinking that this has to be there? Maybe I'm lying to myself probably on a lot of things that I think shouldn't be included, but
we are out of time. Thank you for listening. Again, we have some other videos on the channel, so please take a look at those. I will post the links to all of the things that we referenced today. And as always, please like and comment on the video, and we will respond to your questions next time.